For nearly 20 years, the world treated Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban like proof that fame could be gentle. Her composed glow, his bright thunder, two rhythms somehow in sync. Then, during one show, Keith Urban shifted a single line in a song and the room felt it. Not a serenade, but a soft curtain call disguised as melody. Nobody could quite say why it stung, only that it did. From that night, the story began to fray in public, and whispers reached for an explanation that didn't fit neatly in a headline. Threaded through those whispers was a presence with history instead of hype. Russell Crowe. He isn't a casual name in Nicole Kidman's orbit. He's part of the old map. Shared roots, shared rooms, years when the attention faded and life kept happening. People who know them call Russell Crowe the steady one, the listener, the person who can hold a confidence without turning it into content. Which is why the suggestion that he'd hinted at a deeper truth cut through the usual echo chamber. If Russell Crowe had, in any way, gestured toward a private line Nicole Kidman drew with Keith Urban, the frame of the breakup shifts from shock to sequence. Picture the cost of a long love lived on fast forward. Tours swallow months whole, applause swells and vanishes, and the person you love is measured in time zones and call windows. Nicole Kidman tried to stitch across that distance. Surprise flights, careful schedules, a weekend carved out like a rare stone. But there's a fatigue that comes from competing with the road. It isn't jealousy, it's gravity. Meanwhile, Keith Urban did what performers do when they're trying to prove what they feel. He said it louder. Stage dedications, interviews full of gratitude, speeches that drew tears. Devotion was visible, maybe even truer for having to be declared. Yet the private room told a different tempo. Fewer unguarded laughs, a gaze that slipped away half a second early, the phone face down one time too many. None of that demands a scandal to make sense. The gentler reading is also the more human, not betrayal, but erosion. Keith Urban is built for motion. The road is both work and oxygen. Nicole Kidman builds worlds on set and then reaches for quiet to recover. For a long time, the middle between them held. Over years, the middle moved. What people close to them describe is a conversation where Nicole Kidman finally said what she had delayed saying. Calm, precise, and impossible to mishear. If the same patterns kept repeating, home would stop being home. If the pace never changed, love would be outrun. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth spoken before resentment could curdle. This is where Russell Crowe's rumored role matters, not as a megaphone, but as a weight on the right side of a scale. If the public instinct cast Keith Urban as the blindsided romantic and Nicole Kidman as the architect of a cold exit, a trusted voice suggesting she had tried, had asked, returns her humanity without putting words in her mouth. Russell Crowe has a reputation for blunt care, the kind that doesn't sensationalize. If he stepped forward at all, the timing reads like protection rather than provocation. Watch the endings when you want to understand the story. There weren't barbed statements or courtroom theatrics. Papers moved quickly, calendars settled without spectacle, and neither person auctioned their pain to the highest bidder. That kind of precision usually means the decisions were made in private long before the public saw the signatures. It reads like acceptance rather than ambush. Someone had reached the far shore. Someone else knew chasing would only drag the shore into the sea. Fans retrofitted the past with this new lens. A red carpet clip where Nicole Kidman smiles but doesn't lean in. A backstage moment where Keith Urban glows and she seems elsewhere for the length of a heartbeat. A heartfelt monologue about being saved that now sounds like gratitude and apology braided together. When a couple is invincible, these are quirks. When a couple is breaking, they look like footnotes written years ahead of the last page. There's also the discipline of silence, which both chose. Keith Urban, who often wears his heart without a coat, did not mount a defense. Nicole Kidman, who understands the exchange rate of attention, did not feed the story. If Russell Crowe let a single careful sentence into the air, it functioned as context, not confession. It told the audience, look again and try a kinder reading. No villains required, just two people discovering that love can be true and still be insufficient against distance, pace, and time. So the lyric change wasn't a smoking gun. It was a symptom. The warning wasn't a threat. It was a boundary spoken before bitterness. The fast paperwork wasn't ice. It was mercy. And the friend in the wings, Russell Crowe, wasn't stirring the pot so much as keeping a narrative from tipping over into caricature. The duet hadn't turned into a fight. It had slipped a beat, then another, until two strong voices were singing beautifully, but apart. The hardest part of Grace is knowing when to stop the song while the last note still glows. When the papers finally appeared, the calm was almost eerie. There were no bitter statements, no frantic interviews, just signatures and silence. For Nicole Kidman, that quiet ending spoke louder than any press conference could. For Keith Urban, it marked the moment the music stopped being enough to hold the life they'd built together. Industry insiders noted how fast it all happened. Within weeks, everything was finalized. The same precision that once defined their public love now defined their goodbye. That speed hinted at something deeper, an understanding that resistance would only make the pain louder. Nicole Kidman had already made peace with the ending. Keith Urban seemed to understand it was time to let go. What fascinated everyone was how the story changed once whispers of Russell Crowe's alleged involvement began circulating. He wasn't gossiping. He was grounding the narrative. Friends said he couldn't watch Nicole Kidman be painted as the cold one while Keith Urban was cast as the wounded hero. If he really did say what insiders claim, that Nicole Kidman had given a warning long before the divorce, then the public story suddenly made sense. It reframed everything from chaos into consequence. In truth, Russell Crowe has always been that kind of friend, the one who would rather break Hollywood's code of silence than watch the truth drown in PR spin. People who've worked with him describe him as loyal to the bone but allergic to falsehood. If he saw Nicole Kidman enduring judgment she didn't deserve, stepping forward, even subtly, wouldn't have been betrayal. It would have been balance. Those close to the trio say Russell Crowe waited until the timing was right. He never spoke during the negotiations or while legal terms were being finalized. Only afterward, when the dust had settled, did his quiet hints start to circulate. That patience changed everything. It meant he wasn't interfering, he was clarifying. His timing let Nicole Kidman's dignity remain intact while reminding the public that silence isn't always guilt. Sometimes it's grace. For Keith Urban, that must have stung. To lose both a marriage and the public's full sympathy at once can feel like another kind of heartbreak. Yet his silence since the split says more than any interview could. No denials. No counters. Just quiet acceptance. Insiders think he knew that challenging Russell Crowe's credibility would only reopen wounds better left sealed. Sometimes surrender is the last act of respect you can give someone you once loved. Behind the scenes, the emotional fallout was immense. Nicole Kidman retreated to her circle of confidants, people like Russell Crowe, who knew how to hold space instead of asking questions. She poured herself into work, family, and stillness. Keith Urban, ever the performer, went back to the stage. His next tour felt different, less spectacle, more soul. Fans noticed the change, the way his voice cracked in verses that used to sound effortless, the way every lyric about loss carried a tremor that wasn't there before. Even the audience dynamic shifted. When the breakup first broke, fans rushed to console Keith Urban. But as time passed, the sympathy balanced out. People started to remember the quiet strength Nicole Kidman had always shown. They rewatched old clips, noticed how often she'd looked tired while smiling, how often she'd let him shine while she faded into the background. Suddenly, she wasn't the villain. She was the one who'd held the weight until she couldn't anymore. That's where Russell Crowe's alleged message hit hardest. It wasn't about scandal. It was about humanity. It gave everyone permission to see the story not as betrayal, but as burnout. Two people still caring, still kind, but simply out of rhythm. It's the kind of truth that doesn't trend easily. It's too quiet, too mature, but it's the one that feels real when the noise dies down. Observers have called it one of Hollywood's cleanest separations. No financial warfare. No public dragging, just a line drawn with respect. The absence of spousal demands or custody battles hinted at mutual understanding. She wanted peace. He wanted closure. Their settlement read less like division and more like surrender to reality. And in that, you can almost hear Russell Crowe's influence. The steady friend reminding both sides that sometimes keeping your dignity is the only victory worth claiming. Those who know him well say he values truth over comfort, even when truth costs friendships. Maybe that's why this story feels different. It's not about exposure. It's about restoration. He didn't take sides. He gave context. Weeks later, the world had already moved on to new scandals. But for those who followed closely, the echoes remained. The image of Nicole Kidman walking through an airport without her ring but with her head high, and Keith Urban singing a song that sounded like an apology disguised as art. Both changed, both softened, both still human. So perhaps that's what Russell Crowe wanted people to see. Not a broken marriage, But two survivors of a life lived too loud. No villains, no victims, just exhaustion turned into acceptance. A reminder that endings don't always need explosions, sometimes they only need honesty, and that's why the story endures. Because beyond the headlines and speculation, there's a truth that belongs to everyone who's ever loved and lost. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban didn't fail. They simply finished. Russell Crowe, loyal to the end, helped the world understand that difference. In a city built on performance, that quiet kind of truth might be the rarest act of all.